University, New Delhi, where her research explored the relevance of the most favored nation and non-discrimination rules of the World Trade Organization and their central position in the contemporary multilateral trading system. Her research focuses on issues related to international trade, globalization, and global governance. She is also interested in the politics and economics of interstate relations and the role of international organizations in shaping such relations. She has presented many papers in the national and international seminars and published many articles in the reputed journals. We are very happy to have you have you with us, Dr. Manisha. Please start the session. I'm requesting.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ravinathan. A very good morning to all of you. Let me start by sharing this PowerPoint. Okay,
Madam, please go to the edit sharing. You can go to the icon edit sharing. There you can present it.
I have an icon called Present Now.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. You click on that.
Okay.
Murli, please guide madam. Otherwise, madam, you can also send the PPT to us. Then he can share from here also.
Okay. I see the PowerPoint now. I was trying to find the PowerPoint on this screen. Sorry, I'm not very familiar with Google Meet. So,
madam, go to present and there you select a window or a tab.
Yes, I've selected this
Okay, it is coming.
PowerPoint presentation.
It has come, madam. It has come.
Visible? Okay.
Yeah, visible.
Okay, that's good. The topic for today's talk is post-COVID or the emerging global economic order. And, I would like to begin with a small disclaimer. If you see this quote from John F. Kennedy, when written in Chinese, the word crisis is composed of two characters. One represents danger and the other represents opportunity.
Excuse me, madam.
So, yes.
Can you represent the PPT? Can you stop the presentation and represent? It is not moving, ma'am.
Oh,
we selected second slide, but we are seeing first slide.
Oh, okay. Just hold on. Okay. Is it okay if I send you the slide? I don't see.
Do the same, ma'am.
Okay. I am sharing it once again. If it doesn't work this time, then I'll send it to you.
Okay, ma'am.
Is it visible now? Do you see the second slide?
Okay, yeah. Thank you, ma'am.
Okay. So this particular quote by John F. Kennedy is something which is which sums up the present global scenario very aptly. We have this global pandemic that has presented us with a set of challenges as well as uh, a set of opportunities, challenges in the form of dangers which might uh, descend the world further into chaos and anarchy, or it also at the same time presents us with several opportunities to rethink and recreate things, change what's not working. Now, my disclaimer is that, it's right now too soon for us to identify the global economic order that emerges after this pandemic. And it may be that no single order will emerge. But it is possible to identify some broad trends or changes uh, that uh, are either triggered by this pandemic or that have been intensified. They were already set in motion by events happening before the pandemic and have now intensified by this health crisis. Uh, so as we begin to identify these changes, it gradually becomes apparent uh, that the nature of these changes is not very clear. Whether a particular change or a trend uh, that is shaping up right now presents a grave danger, uh, or if it is an opportunity to make things better. It's not yet clear. And it might take at least a decade or more for us to be able to understand the real nature of these challenges, or these changes, whether they're good or bad for the global economy. So, my attempt here is to summarize these broad trends in the global economy as it is emerging out of this coronavirus pandemic. Uh, I'll just start with identifying the four broad areas in which uh, COVID-19 has intensified or triggered a change. Uh, so the first change is related to globalization. And again, here the nature of this change is not clear. Is globalization slowing down? Are we entering into a phase of deglobalization, or is it intensifying? Are we entering into a phase of globalization 4.0? I'll enlist these four broad trends and then I'll elaborate upon each of them. The second change is with regard to global governance. Is this pandemic strengthening global institutions of governance and making them more relevant for the world that we live in today, or are they weakening these institutions? The third area is in the realm of ideology. The world that existed in most of the 20th century was guided by the principles of neoliberalism. But as the 20th century came to a close, and with the global financial crisis of 2008, it was felt that uh, there was need for an ideological shift, and the global economy, the fundamental logic based on which the global economy had been functioning, was not working for all sections of the society in the best possible way. Does COVID-19 provide the impetus for this ideological shift from neoliberalism? And what is the new ideology that emerges? while it appears to be of something that synthesizes both capitalism and socialism. So social liberalism might be an area that might be the ideology that emerges as relevant for different sections of the society. And the fourth broad trend is in the realm of leadership. The 21st century had already been proclaimed as the Asian century by a lot of scholars. So, does COVID 19 fortify those claims, or is it something which reasserts the traditional hegemony of the United States in the global economy? So let's look at these four broad trends one by one. The first broad change in terms of either the decline or the intensification of globalization. Now, when we talk about deglobalization, this is generally a reference to a less connected world that is characterized by stronger borders, powerful nation states, border controls, governments relying on local solutions than on global institutions to address most of their problems, and restrictions on the free movement of goods, services, people, and capital. Now, this kind of a scenario did not just develop with the beginning of the pandemic, but we see that it started after the 2008 financial crisis, when we see trade declining by 13 or 14% globally, and investment and economic activity slowing down as the financial crisis resulted in the global recession. So this coupled with the discontent over the way the benefits of globalization were sliced up and usurped by the top 1% of the population resulted in the rise of, or the expression of discontent with the manner globalization had been managed until now. So we witness the rise of populist leaders in Europe as well as the United States. And most of these leaders were riding on a wave of opposition to trade liberalization that had left the blue collar workers behind, and opposition to global economic organizations like the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, the World Trade Organization, as these organizations were seen as being driven by a nexus of self-serving government officials and rich businesses. Another important event that signified deglobalization was Brexit. UK has traditionally been a champion of free trade and closer economic integration in the world. But as this country decided to withdraw from the most advanced regional organization that we have in the global economy, the European Union, it was not just a big blow to uh, regional integration and the EU project, but it was also a big blow to globalization on the whole. Uh, when the pandemic started, we see that the British magazine, The Economist, came out with an issue with the term slowballization being on the cover page. And, it was claimed that, is COVID-19 going to kill globalization? Because the flow of trade that had dominated the world economy for decades was already being impacted by the financial crash and the US American trade war. And now COVID 19 seemed like the third and final body blow to this complicated process. It kind of enlisted in details how COVID-19 shutdowns had resulted in a huge drop in air traffic, exports, imports, maritime trade, and various other flows that until now were happening pretty unnoticeably. So this whole idea of globalization slowing down was already being discussed and debated before the pandemic started, but when it started, it seemed to be the final body blow. Another important aspect of deglobalization was in the realm of supply chains. We see that up until the end of the 20th century, companies were mostly chasing the lowest cost suppliers. And as a result of this, the supply chains that had developed were far flung and pretty elaborate. And these supply chains worked pretty well to serve the just-in-time production system that had come up and was working pretty well. But gradually, even before COVID-19, we see that companies had started to consolidate these supply chains. So there was an effort to bring these supply chains closer home, if not in within the domestic territories of a state, to the region, the broad region that a country belonged to. So North American producers were thinking about bringing their supply chains to North America or the Americas, and not just having it far flung into Asia. So these supply chains were already being reframed, and with the onset of COVID-19, as maritime trade came to a halt, we saw that the supply chains completely unraveled and stopped functioning. So on the one hand, this pandemic has resulted in these events which have been an indicator of globalization slowing down or completely unraveling. On the other hand, we see that this pandemic has also led to a chain of events which signify a strengthening of globalization. So to explain this graph, which basically refers to the various phases of globalization that have occurred until now. And the first three phases are also summarized in the literature on globalization. in popular literature, especially, we see Tom Friedman in his book World is Flat talks about these three broad time periods of globalization, where we see that globalization 1.0 was driven by the first phase of industrial revolution. States were the dynamic force, and mechanization, steam engine, water power were the driving technologies of that phase. This was also a phase that's characterized as Pax Britannica, where Britain was the global superpower, the global leader. The second phase of globalization was something that was heralded by the era of mass production, and electricity was the driving technology there. So we see transistors, dynamos, electric generators, televisions spreading all over the world. And this was also the phase roughly that coincided with the 1900s, which was also the period that saw the rise of the United States in the global economy. The third phase was the era of quantum computing. So computers, the IT revolution started. And this is mostly 2000 and later, when we see that Tom Friedman famously claimed that in this phase, the world was becoming flat. The playing field was being leveled between developing and the developed world, so that countries could compete on an equal footing with each other. Internet, especially the IT sector, was viewed as connecting various pools of knowledge, and countries could now compete for knowledge and work with each other on an equal footing. So a person sitting in Bangalore could provide services to consumers in the United States or Europe. Now, this view was, while it was indicative of the vast opportunities that were presented by the third phase of globalization, it was not without its shortcomings. So it was criticized that this whole notion of a flat world was not pretty accurate. It was probably okay in in geographical terms, but in the real world, the differences between the developed economies of North America and Europe and the less developed regions of Asia and Africa still remained. But nevertheless, this was an important phase. Now, the fourth stage of globalization is something that that was being discussed mostly in elite groupings like the World Economic Forum. So in 2019, we see that in Davos, the World Economic Forum meeting that took place focused on this fourth phase of globalization that is said to be characterized by a fusion of technologies in the physical, digital, and the biological sphere. So we see the rise of artificial intelligence and nanotechnology, which is, really taking globalization to a whole another level. This year, in January, the physical meeting of the World Economic Forum was not held, but nevertheless, they had several virtual events. And in one of those events, the physicist Michio Kaku from the City University of New York. He talks about this fourth revolution and says that this is something uh, which indicates the power of physics to create the perfect capitalism, which where we see that the middlemen are eliminated. So the things like rise of e-commerce and increasing use of digital technologies accelerated by the work from home era that started with the pandemic. These events are all accelerating the process of globalization and taking it into its fourth and more advanced stage. This is also evident if you look at the development of vaccines, the new mRNA technology on which most COVID vaccines are based, are technologies that belong to the realm of globalization 4.0 or the fourth industrial revolution. So it's not very easy to say what exactly is happening. Probably in a course of time, it will be more clear whether COVID-19 resulted in deglobalization or whether it intensified and accelerated globalization and pushed it or catapulted the next stage of this process. But nevertheless, these are the broad changes that were brought upon or intensified by this pandemic. The next set of changes were in the realm of global governance. Now, the global governance system that existed in most of the 20th century, it was largely built in the aftermath of the Second World War. And we see that with the onset of the 20th century, this institutional setup was becoming too bulky and at times too unconsequential when major global events were concerned. The United Nations had become it's the closest representative of world government, yet it has some serious failings, and these failings were there in the 20th century. Also in the 21st century, we see Syria, the Middle East, and the UN's handling of these crises that were widely criticized. Russia's annexation of Crimea happened despite, the UN and the world keeping a watch and trying to uphold the sacrosanct principle of territorial sovereignty. So the ability of this world body to affect real changes was something that was questioned by several events. If you look at the global economic organizations, we have the Bretton Woods twins, IMF and World Bank. Now, both these organizations were largely viewed as being driven by corporate interests and being dominated by Western governments. So there was considerable opposition. Their handling of various economic crises in Latin America, East Asia, had been severely criticized. In the 21st century, its handling of the Greek financial crisis and the European sovereign debt crises was again criticized and questioned widely. And when compared to what happened after the 2008 financial crisis in the US, that was again a point of significant differences in the handling of these crises. The World Trade Organization was another a world body whose continued relevance was questioned. The so-called Doha development round was deadlocked and failed to produce any significant results. And in the past few years, we see that the dispute settlement body of the WTO had also become quite dysfunctional, as the appellate body members were not reappointed, and eventually, there is no appellate body, or the system of appeals in the WTO does not exist anymore. It hangs in limbo. And when the pandemic struck, the inability of the World Health Organization to prevent the spread of the virus and to ensure or question China about its initial handling of the outbreak was again severely criticized and posed questions for the efficacy of this world body. So COVID-19 has brought to the fore the underlying weaknesses that these global institutions have had. But on the other hand, it has also provided these world bodies with several opportunities that have catapulted them into purposeful action. So we see that the UN has taken a really proactive approach in bringing together various actors and enhancing cooperation to address this crisis. The UN Secretary General, in his Our Common Agenda approach, has... My computer is going to be out of battery. Okay. The UN Secretary General, in his Our Common Agenda report, calls for the need for action, and he stresses upon including, networked and effective multilateralism. There's need for an inclusive and more effective multilateral effort to tackle such global problems like the pandemic and climate change. So he makes recommendations across 4 broad areas and calls for a new social contract that is to be anchored in human rights. He calls for better management of critical global commons and global public goods that deliver equitably and sustainably for all. The need for more action from these organizations was also felt as being essential to ensure that the pandemic did not further accentuate the divide between the developed and the less developed world. The economic organizations have also collaborated with each other. So we see the heads of these economic organizations, WTO, IMF, World Bank, have come together with the WHO and the World Intellectual Property Organization to enhance the access to vaccines and COVID medicines for the less developed world. the global initiative COVAX, that is led by Gavi, has made a huge difference. By August 2021, we see that 200 million vaccine doses were delivered in more than 100 countries. This was still less than the 600 million doses that was initially projected, but nevertheless, this was an important initiative that is making a big difference in the less developed world. In the aftermath of this global pandemic, we also see that fears related to Brexit, that other countries in the EU might follow the United Kingdom in leaving the European Union, have more or less subsided now. So again, we see these dual events taking place, a parallel track where we see a weakening or intensification of challenges for these global organizations, and at the same time we see that the pandemic provided them with a sense of purposeful action and an opportunity to reorient themselves in the 21st century. In terms of ideology, we see that again there is a considerable change. The post-Bretton Woods system that was set up was largely based on the idea of embedded liberalism, and here the leadership was provided by countries like United States and Great Britain. The idea of embedded liberalism was something that was made popular by a widely cited article by John Ruggie. And it very aptly identifies the normative framework of the Bretton Woods institutions that were set up. Ruggie borrows this idea of embedded liberalism from Karl Polanyi, who in his book Global Transformation talks about markets becoming disembedded from the society during the 19th century. So he asserts that the post-Second World War global system that is established should make an effort to re-embed the markets into the larger social and governmental setup. So embedded liberalism was basically a way to a midway or a compromise between these two opposing objectives of promoting free trade and liberal ideas and free play of the market forces, and ensuring collective supervision and control of these market forces. So this was established through the IMF and the World Bank. And we see that the global economy thrived and flourished under this system of embedded liberalism in the 1950s and the 60s. Economic growth was more rapid than it was ever seen before, and the global economy expanded considerably with the increase in trade and investment all over the world. But in the 1970s, we see that the system broke down with the suspension of the gold dollar link. And after this, we see the rise of neoliberalism or neoliberal economic ideas that was encapsulated in the prescriptions of the Washington Consensus. Now, this term was largely indicative. It referred to a set of policies that focused on improved fiscal discipline, reducing public debt, promoting liberalization and privatization in various governments. So this term was indicative of the influence of the developed world in the functioning of the Bretton Woods organizations. The IMF and the World Bank pushed the Washington Consensus policies through their financial assistance provided to various Latin American and East Asian economies that were facing crises. So this was also an era that is symbolized by the Thatcher-Reagan revolution. So it was felt, Reagan famously said in his presidential inauguration, that government is best that governs the least. It was he asserted that in the present scenario, government is not the solution to our problems, but government is the problem. So free play of market forces was what was deemed as the best way for economic as well as political decision making. And this system again functioned pretty well in the 80s and 90s and catapulted or further increased trade and investment in the global economy. But after the 2008 financial crisis, we see that serious questions were posed on the continued relevance of this free play of market forces, whether market forces were the best decision makers. So economists, along with the skeptics or the critics of neoliberalism, joined the ranks of people who questioned the capitalist logic of functioning. So in the aftermath of the 2008 financial crisis, we see that it was felt necessary to balance capitalist market forces with social welfare policies. So we see the rise of the center left in this post-2008 era, where regulation of market forces was emphasized and was viewed as being integral to ensuring the efficacy of these market forces. This also social liberalism or the rise of center left also emphasized the expansion of civil and political rights, and it was felt that greater emphasis needed to be placed on social policies. More welfare programs needed to be implemented to address poverty, unemployment, promote education, healthcare, develop infrastructure. So again, we see challenges to the dominant ideology of neoliberalism gaining strength with the onset of the global pandemic. This pandemic has substantially increased inequality in the world, and hence we see that the need for more proactive action is felt based on the idea of social liberalism. Uh, if we look at the structure of the international system, again, we have two scenarios. The 21st century has been proclaimed as the Asian century, and if you look at the handling of this pandemic in Asian countries, first of all, in China, which has adopted this zero COVID policy and has claimed success in controlling the pandemic. It was the first country that shut down and the first that reopened and started manufacturing. And recovery of the rest of the world critically depended on PPE being supplied from China. Other East Asian countries like Vietnam, Singapore, Hong Kong have been lauded in their handling of this health crisis. These are countries that had already gone through previous outbreaks of coronavirus, the H1N1 flu. So they had some experience, but nevertheless, they have better handled this crisis if you compare them with Europe or North America. The other favorable development that establishes the rise of Asia is in the economic realm. We see that mostly supply chains had started shifting or unraveling or getting closer home, but they were not really shifting out of Asia. Most of the factories or manufacturing plants that were closed in China were relocated to other Asian countries that had cheap labor or cheap resources. So even though supply chains are shifting and moving, they are still largely based in Asia or Asian countries. So the pandemic is viewed as a significant event that has solidified the rise of Asia in the global economy. But it has not established the dominance of Asia in the global economy. We still see that the United States and the US dollar still is at the center of the global economy. These North America and Europe, despite their unsuccessful handling of the pandemic, they have emerged out of the pandemic better and faster than the rest of the world. Economic growth has accelerated on the basis of the massive stimulus plans that were put into action the moment the pandemic started. The US dollar is still the main focal point of the global economy. And in terms of military and economic strength, we see that North America and Europe is generally unsurpassed by most Asian economies. So again, this pandemic on the one hand has solidified the rise of Asia, but it has not really established Asia or any Asian country as the dominant superpower. And recently, with the invasion of Ukraine that started just a day or two ago is again something that adds Russia to this superpower rivalry. An old player that has now re-emerged. So we already have talk of this bipolar rivalry becoming more complicated with Russia throwing its hat in the ring. So the fundamental structure of the global system is still not very clear, but that is something which might or might not come out clearly in a short span of time. It might take more time for us to understand the true nature of this global order. So, with this, I would like to conclude my discussion. Again, this is something which is a work in progress. I would love to have not just questions, but also comments, suggestions, and research inputs from all of you. Thank you.
Uh, Thank you so much, Dr. Manisha Sinha. Now the session is open for the question and answer. I'm requesting the participants, please type the question in the chat box, or you can unmute yourself and please ask the question. Dear participants, I'm requesting you all to type the question in the chat box, or you can unmute and you can ask the question. Let them think for a minute, Dr. Manisha.
Okay.
So I have a small doubt
Mhm.
regarding that deglobalization. You have mentioned in the first session, initially itself, the deglobalization. So what is your opinion? How far it may go? The concept of deglobalization. You said it's not just accelerated after COVID. Earlier, before COVID, also it was there. Correct. So,
Yeah.
what is your opinion? How far it goes? Because the developing countries, so-called developing countries, are mostly depending on the supply chain, and based on the economy only, they are called to be a developing nations. They're emerging. So, when the concept of deglobalization started with the major powers, when they cut the supply chain, what would happen? What is the impact with the developing countries?
Uh, well, the term deglobalization, as it denotes the slowdown in trade and breakdown of economic ties, this was something which is more indicative of the abrupt shutdowns that happened in the aftermath of the coronavirus pandemic. And the impact of these shutdowns is still apparent in most of our lives. So when we go out to get groceries or to get order things online, we see huge delays, we see non-availability of products. So this is something that is bound to be continued. uh, and in not just a day commodities of everyday use, but also uh, in things like the availability of cars, electronics, and various other products. So this globalization is or this these aspects of deglobalization would continue to affect our lives at least for this year. Perhaps it could go on till the next year if we have new variants emerging and production and manufacturing again being impacted, maritime trade being impacted due to these new variants. So there might be a little more time before it uh, uh, stops affecting our lives. It might continue for at least a year or two before things return to normal.
Yeah, thank you. And one more question. The China, who's having a major supply chain in Asia, particularly, the trade between China and US, it was more. So, what is your opinion that after the restriction given by the USA, still the China can cope up, or what are the other options they have, the China?
You mean the tariffs?
Yes, in all the way, the trade, the China now restricting the China, the USA is restricting the China in trade aspect. What the China would do?
Yes, US China trade has been impacted, but then it's important to remember that China is not just an important supplier or production hub for the United States, but it also serves as an important production hub for the rest of the world. So, Europe, most Asian countries rely on China for supply of products. You, and if you look at the impact of the tariffs that were imposed during the Trump administration, the studies that have examined their impact have concluded that it actually ended up hurting the US consumers and raising prices for American consumers on the for these products that on which tariffs were imposed. So again, China is not going to lose because of these tariffs that were imposed on Chinese imports. A tariff war or a trade war never produces any winners. Most of the times we see that both the sides involved in a tariff war end up losing to some extent or another. And in this case, I would say that that is the case. Both China and the United States incurred significant losses because of this tariff exchange.
Thank you. There is one more question. In what way the Cold War type of environment between USA and China affect the international political space? This question is from audience.
Uh, it has manifested in various areas, not just trade and economy, but also investment, governance of international organizations. We see when the US pulled out, China stepped in and made a generous donation to the World Health Organization. So basically, whenever the US is viewed as falling short of its global leadership role, we will have China and now even Russia stepping up to fill that role. That's the only way they can uh, contend to be a global superpower. So we should expect this rivalry to manifest in the political realm, the technology realm. We see, every country, not just China and the United States, but we have other countries as well that are now vying to produce semiconductors. So this rivalry is going to be uh, it's going to manifest itself in various global realms: economics, politics, technology, military wise. There's no limit to it. I see this kind of a rivalry extending in each and every sector.
Thank you. Participants, if you have any question, please unmute and ask.
Yeah, there's a question about the current situation between Ukraine and Russia and its impact on global order. So, yes, it is going to uh, add Russia to this superpower rivalry that was already going on between China and the United States. If you listened to this hour-long speech then that President Putin gave a day or two ago, he kind of explains his larger vision behind his actions in Crimea and Ukraine, and he talks about limiting the impact of NATO to what it was in the 1990s. So he, uh, in a way, wants to turn back the clock and limit the influence of NATO to an era where it had not expanded east of Germany. Uh, and he wants to he's somebody who faced who saw the collapse of the Soviet Union very closely. He was a KGB operative in Germany when in 1989. So he took this whole incident very personally, and he wants to re-establish Russia as a global superpower next to the United States. So this is going to again have a significant impact on global order, but I would say it's a little too soon for us to draw any conclusions here.
Any other questions? Participants? And thank you so much, Dr. Manisha Sinha. It was an excellent presentation and also the well explained from the economical point of view of the global order. You have really explained from the various stages of the globalization and the various the theories which is implied and other things. Thank you once again. I believe there is no question, so may I conclude this session?
Thank you.
Yes, 1 second. Yes, I think, yeah. We have come to the end of this program. It's my privilege to propose vote of thanks on this occasion. Respected correspondent, principal, colleagues, our valued guest, Dr. R. Pavanandi Vembulu, and Dr. Manisha Sinha, and dear participants. On behalf of the entire JMJ College fraternity, I extend a very hearty vote of thanks to all for gracing today's event. First and foremost, I extend my sincere thanks to our guest speaker, Dr. R. Pavanandi Vemblu, for his interesting and highly informative speech. I take this opportunity to express my heartfelt thanks to our guest speaker, Dr. Manisha Sinha, for her valuable contribution. I express my deep gratitude to our correspondent, Dr. Sister Teresa Magade, for her encouragement and support. A sincere thanks to our principal, Dr. Sister Shiny KP, for giving us an opportunity to organize this event. I would like to thank our beloved Vice Principal, Sister Aruna, and Ms. C.H. Vishrantama, Head of the Department of Political Science, and all other faculties in the humanities departments and other departments for their moral support and guidance. A special thanks to Mr. Murali and Mr. Ravi for their technical support. My sincere thanks to all the participants for their active participation in this webinar. Thank you all for making this event more successful with your contribution. Before we conclude the webinar, I have an announcement for the participants. The feedback form will be sent to your registered email ID within 2 hours. After filling the feedback form, you will be receiving the e-certificate within 2 or 3 days. If anyone doesn't receive the certificate, you may contact us. So once again, I thank you all for making this webinar a very effective and successful. Thank you.
Thank you, Manisha Sinha madam, for your very enriching and excellent session. I'm sure that all the participants are really enriched by your session. Thank you so much for your
Thank you.
availability
Thank you,
and
sister.
generosity.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone, madam. Thank you, organizers. Thank you.
We
Thank
shall,
you.
yeah,
Yes,
we shall
yeah.
wind up.
Thank you, participants. Now we are winding up the session. Thank you for the cooperation and looking forward to you all for in the another session. Thank you.